Hi, thank you guys for coming today. I'm gonna just jump right in with a little story, okay? I work in this field of trying to change government. And one day, this was in the fall of 2013, I made a phone call to a woman who has a very big job. She is the head of the government operations for the entire state of California. So it's 39 million people, it's about $170 billion in spend. Her name's Maribel Batcher. She covers all of this. It's HR, it's finance, it's procurement for the entire state. And I had a very presumptive ask for her. It was something that probably some random woman from the tech industry should not have been calling her about. But it was this. It was the Child Welfare Services New System Project. And it was a $600 million procurement that was going to come across her desk. And because she was the head of all government operations, it was her job to sign this thing. So why was I calling her about a $600 million IT procurement with the state of California? Well, I was calling because my first job out of college, I worked in the child welfare system. And I knew some of these stats. 475,000 reports of injury, death, and neglect of kids in California every year. There's about 100,000 kids in the care of the state. It's in foster homes and group homes and other things. And essentially, by the state's own admission, this is in a report from the IT department to the legislature, child welfare service workers don't have the appropriate tools or the ability to access the available information needed to perform their jobs to help these 500,000 kids. So what does that mean? What does that actually look like? Well, it's fax machines. This is actually from Humboldt County, where they were communicating between the child welfare services folks and law enforcement by handwritten notes faxed back and forth to each other. So this is how you get, as in happened in some states, I don't think this actually happened in California, kids accidentally put in a foster care situation of a convicted rapist because your law enforcement and your child welfare people aren't talking to each other. And it's not because they don't want to talk to each other, and it's not because they don't care and they're not doing the best job that they possibly can. It's because they don't have the tools that they need to communicate between each other. And we know what happens to kids when the people who are trying to take the best job they can of them don't have those tools. So I said to Maribel, I would respectfully request that you not sign this $600 million procurement. And she said, well, why not? And I said, because it won't work. And she said, why won't it work? And I said, well, we'll talk about that. And she said, Jen, do you think I don't know that? The last 7 big projects for the state of California have all failed. I said, well, then why would you sign it? And she said, because this is the only way government has to make technology. If you know of a better way, you better tell me. And I said, I do think there's another way. What she was referring to is this. This is how we do procurement in government today. This is one from the Defense Department. But diagrams that explain how you do procurement in government look like this all over government. Is it complex? Yes. Do you want to shoot yourself when you're looking at it? Yes. But it has real human outcomes. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the rest of that conversation with Maribel at the end of that, at the end of this talk. But when I said to her, there is another way, this is what I meant. And this is what we practice at Code for America, 18F and USDS, which mentioned these other groups. This is how we think about technology for government. And it's also how many cities, states, counties, and other parts of federal government think about it, including Oakland, California, who I happen to know is sitting here in the audience. And it's this. You start with the user. You build a digital service delivery around the needs of your user. So in this case, it could be the kids. It could be the child welfare worker. Then you really build an operations and change your operations around those needs, and the policy follows. So instead of a top-down, we're going to create policy and then we're going to hand stuff off over layers and layers of bureaucracy, it says let's start with the user and build out from there. And it's a radically, radically different way of thinking about how not just we do government technology, but how government is supposed to work in the 21st century. So we know we have these implementation gaps. And we have a very famous implementation gap that you've all heard of. That's healthcare.gov, happened a couple of years ago. I happened to be working at the White House when this implementation gap happened. We spent a lot of political capital getting the Affordable Care Act passed. And then we put up a website and it didn't work, and we almost lost the law because of it. We have a lot of these examples where essentially the people have spoken. We have said yes, and the people who've decided to make these, we've elected into office have spoken and said, yes, I was elected and I want to do this. We're going to do this Affordable Care Act thing. And then we actually don't get what we intended because we can't implement our policies. Now, what happened with healthcare.gov? Well, you remember famously, it didn't go very well for the first couple of weeks. Got a little bit better. This was a great headline that we were laughing at the office. Healthcare.gov is slightly less terrible today, adds a plan preview feature that occasionally works. Why was it starting to get better? Because we brought in a team of people who could help fix it. Most of them, and not all of them, please understand, were from Silicon Valley. That's sort of a little bit of a marketing story, that it's Silicon Valley talent that comes in to do this. But a bunch of people came in who essentially do what I showed you before. They start with user needs, and they work outward from there. They were just following users through the website and fixing what they could, sort of feature after feature, bug after bug, in a relentless way. One of the folks that worked on healthcare.gov, many of them who came in from the outside actually were just contractors, subcontractors to subcontractors to subcontractors, working on an hourly basis. So in the office, when we would look at their time cards, we saw that some of them had worked 20-hour days for 100 days straight trying to fix that site because they really, really wanted their fellow Americans to have health care. In the end, it worked. I would like to remind you that we all think of healthcare.gov as a failure, and in fact, by the first open enrollment period, we had more people enrolled in what people call Obamacare at the end of the first enrollment than we even thought possible before the site broke. So it actually worked quite well in the end, and we continue to have high enrollment numbers. And one of the reasons that we did is a lot of those people stayed on, and they became something called the United States Digital Service, which still exists in the White House. It's a bunch of fantastic people who have come from all over different places, primarily in the tech and design profession, and said the best possible, highest use of my skills is making my country function in terms of the government. And by the way, you can do this as an emoji. Send it to your friends. Strong Computer America. It's the way to say, I don't do sign language, but I do emojis. And this is actually taken from the whiteboard in the wall at the office at 735 Jackson Street at the United States Digital Service. So they're part of this family of people who are doing it this new way. But the most important thing that happened out of the United States Digital Service happened out of the failure of healthcare.gov, of bringing people to Washington, D.C., who were also doing this in the way that we do it at Code for America and at cities around the country. It wasn't just about technology. There's a woman named Cecilia Munoz, who is the head of the Domestic Policy Council, who happened to be around watching all this happen. She and I got to work together because she had worked very heavily, of course, on the ACA, and because that was an implementation phase, she was now working on what we thought at the time would be comprehensive immigration. And she said, oh my God, if we're going to lose the ACA, potentially, and of course we didn't, but if we're at risk of losing the ACA to bad implementation, God, we can't lose comprehensive immigration reform to implementation risk, and started working with us. And she immediately got it. She started working with these folks, and she said, oh, this isn't a better way to make websites. This is a better way to govern. Starting with users isn't just how we should be making technology. It's how we should be making government. She said that to me, and I thought, oh my God, she's right. This is a transformational way of thinking. So let me give you an example of this in our work at Code for America. We work with cities, states, and counties. We work particularly on we work in a number of areas, and one of the programs that we have that's sort of most developed is around the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. I often ask people to raise their hands if they've ever been on it, but we unfortunately still have a bit of a stigma around this program in our country, despite the fact that half of Americans will be on SNAP at some point in their lives. It's an incredibly powerful program that lifts an enormous number of people out of poverty every year. And it's very important also because it is the program nationally that is most highly correlated with better health and education outcomes for kids. So every community in this country should want every eligible person to be on SNAP. It raises incomes, it keeps kids in school, keeps them able to learn. In California, unfortunately, only 55% of eligible people are actually enrolled. And if you want to ask yourself why, this might help you understand. This is how you apply for food stamps in San Francisco or in Oakland, many of the counties in California, though not all of them. It's a 50-screen application. It has over 200 questions. It doesn't work on a mobile phone, so if you don't have broadband internet access at home and a computer, you might try to go to the library to complete this application. And unfortunately, many library computers time out after 30 minutes. This thing takes close to an hour, and you can't save your work, so you kind of can't get through it at the library. By the way, of those over 200 questions, there's an entire page. It's 7 questions that are variants on this one. Have you or any member of your household been convicted of trafficking SNAP benefits of $500 or more after September 22nd, 1996? Have you been convicted of trading them for guns or ammunition? Have you been convicted of trading them for drugs? The final one is explosives. It's a series of 7 questions designed, I think, to insult you and tell you that we think that you're a criminal, which is not the experience I think most Americans want people who need a little bit of help with food to have. It's not what the taxpayer intended. So this is kind of the thing we do with Code for America. We make a better interface. And so quite a long time ago, actually, we said this can be easier, and we made an application for SNAP that works on a mobile phone and takes about 7 minutes. And we thought, great, now we'll have fixed the problem. Everyone will be able to sign up, and we'll get to 100% enrollment in SNAP in California. We thought, you know what, we should probably just check that. So we started texting our users and saying, hey, we know that you applied, now what happened? And we found a lot of really, really interesting things. So this is the letter that Jake Solomon, who started this project at Code for America, got when he applied. Unfortunately, he doesn't speak Chinese, so he didn't know what it said. What it said was, we're going to call you on April 25th at 9 a.m. for your interview. Well, he's not the only person who didn't take his interview call. A lot of people actually get the letter telling them when their interview is after the date of the interview. So that's hard to do. And that, because we were texting all these people, then we actually could say, actually, San Francisco or whatever county we're talking to, X% of your people are having this barrier. They don't get the interview. They start over at the beginning of the process, back to that fun form I showed you. Here's another one, and this is from a different county. All of our users said, yes, well, I got the initial paperwork, and then I got this form, a fraud prevention and protection form, and it says in it if I say something wrong, I'm under penalty of perjury, and that I could go to jail. And so I didn't fill out this form, and I didn't proceed in the process. So our team called the county welfare director of this particular county and said, you know, this form isn't required by any law, policy, or regulation. And she said, yeah, but we don't send out that form. Every one of our users had gotten it. And 2 weeks later, she called us back and she said, oh my gosh, thank you so much for telling me that. I didn't realize our eligibility workers were sending this form out. I've asked them to stop. And then we can see in our data that more people are actually getting through the process and getting food stamps in that county. And by the way, that response, thank you for telling me I'm fixing the problem, is the response that we get from public servants when we tell them what's going on. Almost universally, they are grateful. They very much want to help the people that our taxpayer dollars are intended to help, and they just need a little help knowing what to do next sometimes. This is an absolutely fixable problem. The problem is we haven't been paying attention. We have to care if we're going to fix it. I want to tell you a story again about how getting into the operations and the policy of these programs beyond just the pretty website is actually going to have a dramatic effect on how we govern over time and how we bring government into the 21st century. This is actually something that Cecilia told me about that happened after I left the White House. There was a team that had, after we started the United States Digital Service sort of coming out of this healthcare.gov rescue, the Health and Human Services Department, unsurprisingly, was kind of excited about these USDS folks, great tech people that can help. And they asked them to come work on a particular project, the Medicare Access and Chip Reauthorization Act, which, if you'll notice, is a nested acronym, because we like acronyms within acronyms in government. And what this is a new law. And so there was 11 months for the rule makers to write the regulations that would derive from that law. Does anybody here policymaker, other than some of the people in the room that I happen to know are? Yes. So tell me if this sounds correct. You have about 11 months. You're going to do all the possible research you can on what the regs should look like. Then you're going to ship those regs, and then you're going to hand them off to somebody to make a website or a form or some way of implementing. Does that sound about right? So that's pretty much what normally happens. But Mina Shang, who was running the Health and Human Services Digital Services team, said to these guys, I have a proposal for you. What I want you to do is do your best guess at what the regs should say in 2 months and give it to us. We're going to do a real quick and dirty website that, and I should explain, doctors would use this. It's a way to pay more money for better quality care as part of all of this work that we're doing to try to overhaul our healthcare system. So we're going to watch doctors and people in doctors' office use this sort of prototype website that's based on your regulations. And then you're going to go back and edit your regulations, and we're going to go back and edit the website. And we're going to do that 5 or 6 times before you publish the final regulations. And this has not been done this way all that much in the past, though our friends in the United Kingdom who have a government digital service there have tried it. And when they did it, they had sort of the same results, which is the policymakers said, oh my God, I think I've just shipped the best regs I've ever written in my life. Our friend Tom Loosemore in the UK said his first policymaker friend said, I think I've just realized that the 500 pages that I wrote before are 500 pages of untested assumptions, and I'm going to go put them over here. And I'm going to start working with actual users when I write regs in the future. He has another great line, which is, why is policymaking educated guesswork that is where the feedback loop is measured in years? Where else do we have feedback that comes to us over years and can't adjust? So this is just a great example of how you see this going out of technology. Oh, look, I put that in my slides. Look, lucky me. Out of just the technology realm and into all of the different ways that need to work together much, much more tightly for us to be more successful in government. And when I say successful in government, I mean if we have a program like SNAP, everybody eligible should get it because we know it has benefits. Now, nowhere is there a greater gap between the intentions of our law and policy and the outcomes than in our criminal justice system. I think many of you know this. We wouldn't have a society that has 22% of the world's prisoners with only 4% of the world's populations if we were doing this right. So we think that our jails are full of people who've been convicted of a crime. And certainly a lot of what's wrong with our criminal justice system is having criminalized things that probably shouldn't be criminalized and just bad policy. And some of that bad policy doesn't come from bad implementation. It comes from bad ideology in some ways. But there's also a significant number of people who are incarcerated in our country really just for administrative failures. About 40% of people are behind bars for what you and I would not consider an act of a crime. So for example, if you, in many places, you could get a sort of a basic traffic ticket, but then you have to actually take the entire day off work and go stand in line to pay or dismiss that ticket. And if you have a job that doesn't allow you to do that, you're choosing between keeping your job and taking the whole day off. Many people make the rational decision not to pay or deal with that ticket. The next time that they run a red light, make an illegal left turn, they're literally in jail. There's a lot of other reasons that people are in jail that are not just that, but that are really not, they're not criminal. We started working with one jurisdiction in particular, this was Salt Lake County, where they have a lot of people in jail, either because they are being held pre-trial or because, which is a terrible thing to do, it disrupts families, or because they've served their time and they've been released on probation, but they don't reoffend, they get what's known as a technical violation. It could be that they missed a drug test, they missed a date in court, they missed filing paperwork. And the problem is that it's a lot of back and forth. There's a very, very high number of things that people are required to do when they're on probation. And the probation officers need to be in sort of constant contact with people on probation, but the way they communicate with them is primarily phone, these IVR systems where someone on probation is asked to call in, and it's just like if you're on jury duty, and it's like a 3-minute phone call thing, you're standing there going, my minutes are being used up, to know if you have to go in for your drug test today or something like that, or actual letters. Except they do know that text works, but they had 120 case managers in Salt Lake County, all sharing one iPhone to try to communicate back and forth with their clients. So there was a high demand for this thing. It actually sat over on this credenza in the corner, and they would get up and go try to find their text and go back, which is not a great way of doing things. So it's not rocket science what we thought we could do to help here. We thought we'd make a sort of web-based text messaging system that all the probation officers could use just from their desktops. And we thought it would primarily be a way to tell people, hey, remember to go to your drug test, hey, remember to show up in court. But while we were waiting for the data to actually put in to notify people, we sort of created this two-way text messaging system. And it turns out people just started texting back and forth, their POs and their clients. And we found out a lot about what's going on with people while they're trying to succeed on probation. We found out a lot of things like, yes, I got a job today and they didn't let me take a break and that's why I didn't call in. Well, what do you do when that happens? That's a mark against you and you could end up going back to jail. A lot of these things where people are asked to be at a drug test and at a court date at the same time. And we really developed the thesis that it's sort of like American Ninja Warrior. If you're trying to actually succeed on probation, you better be really, really good. But it's almost impossible to succeed with all the things that we ask folks to do. So what we realized we were trying to do was, of course, what we originally set out to do. Let's make it easier for people to get through the system. But then let's collect an enormous amount of data about what's tripping people up and then use that to change the system. We've got to make probation a lot easier to get through so fewer people have to return to jail. It's a terrible use of taxpayer dollars, and it's a cruel thing to do somebody who's served their time. So this is one of our team's official mottos that's on the website, but the actual motto that they use is no one should be in jail for bullshit, which I think is a good line. And I also think that no kid should be without food assistance for administrative bullshit either. By the way, anybody can do this. You don't have to work at Code for America or work at the White House or work at the City of Oakland to help make government technology work better for people and change and bring our government into the 21st century. That thing with texting back and forth, some great folks in Tulsa who are part of the Code for America brigade there, Code for Tulsa, did this on their own as a volunteer project. They loaded the data from the CJIS system, the Criminal Justice Information Services system, in and started texting folks who were going to be released pre-trial so that they would show up in court, and that used that to convince the public defender's office to actually let people go pre-trial. So they were holding almost everybody before their trial, which is, as I said, a terrible, terrible thing, until a volunteer group of regular citizens came along and said, we can help you do that differently. We have groups like this around the country. There's 65 amazing Code for America brigades doing this kind of work. Some of them are in criminal justice. Some of them are just making transportation data more accessible so you know when your bus is coming. Some of them are working on things like food stamps. Some of them are making budgets more transparent in City Hall. But whatever it is they're doing, these are regular people who just say, this is the way that I can have an impact on my community. It's not just helping out with nonprofits, which are really important. It's also helping our government get better. And I just want to spend 2 minutes showing you a little bit about our Code for America brigades. A little bit louder? Yep, okay, great.
The brigade program is the volunteer branch of Code for America.
To bridge the gap between local government and the community. When I think of government, I think it's for the people, by the people, and if the people want it to be different and better, then we have to get engaged.
Getting city workers engaged with entrepreneur communities and with the technology communities, the GIS and data science communities.
Designers, concerned citizens, really everyone has a place here.
Even if you don't understand, like, all the tech talk.
Don't be put off by code.
We provide a way for people to use the skills that they really are good at, the ones that they already have, that can give back to the communities where they live.
You might go adopt a park and clean up a park. It's a similar thing that maybe you do with a website.
It's just sort of a matter of playing matchmaker and finding the need and finding the motivated people.
What would it actually take if the 32,000 jurisdictions across the country fixed
About traffic safety.
education,
Opioid abuse. Affordable housing.
Coastal resiliency.
We have a user, a scenario,
Creating a journey map.
A database hooked up to an API.
Predictive model.
It's an avenue for us to participate in government and build relationships and help outside of the traditional avenues of voting and protesting.
shout out to all the small cities out there.
We get people from opposite sides of the political spectrum. When they come together like, hey, I'm going to be affected by the hurricane, you're going to be affected by the hurricane, let's work together to actually do something that's for the common good.
The cities, especially in my part of the country, they've lost a lot of their tax base. We need to be smarter about our resources. It saves us wasting what little money we have.
if you're passionate about the community that you live in,
If you've ever thought government could be better,
It's been the most rewarding experience of my whole life.
Whatever your goals are, to advance in your career, build something for your portfolio, or even to just network.
I've met so many different people and made so many friendships.
it's the nexus of solutioning and technology and ideation.
There's all these projects.
Give it a try.
Is Victoria here, by the way? Vicki? Yeah, there you are. You just saw her up there. So she runs Open Austin, she and some other folks. If you happen to live here in Austin, that would be my call to action, and you can meet her right afterwards. If you happen to live in, say, Oakland, California, we've got some folks here too. We have our mayor, Libby Schaff, is here, and Mylene Garcia, who works with Open Oakland. And so we may have others. Any others in the house? Any other brigades? No. These are real people. These are real groups. They're doing really amazing things. And I have some URLs at the end, so you will I will plead with you at the end to take action. But let me first tell you a little bit more about sort of this vision. So we're not just talking in the end about fixing one service and then another service. So I've talked a little bit about we could make food stamps better. We can make probation better. We can do all those things, and we can't do it without everybody getting involved. But we can do all of those things if we really try. I think ultimately, though, we need to stop thinking about the silos in government and say, wait a minute. If I'm texting someone on probation in Salt Lake County to tell them to go remember their drug test, why would I say, please come to the office and fill out a bunch more forms? We already know your name and your address and your income and a bunch of things. Why wouldn't I just say, hey, by the way, do we have permission to put you in the SNAP program so you can have a little bit extra money for food? Just text us why, and we'll consider that permission. Why are we just helping people with government programs without putting them through this long bureaucratic process? We can do that. And if we were to do that, if we were actually to say, nope, that's how government should function, we're going to hold it to that standard, there'd be a whole lot of work that would have to be done on the back end. I know there's some technologists here who would say, yeah, but those legacy systems are all going to have to get updated if we're going to be able to do stuff like that. And that's exactly the point. So do you remember that slide I showed you of the 50-screen application for food stamps? Would anybody like to guess how much taxpayers spent on that application? It's one of 3 applications in the state of California. Thank God not every county uses its own one. But that one of 3 in one state, we paid $800 million to build it, and we pay $80 million a year to maintain it. This is built in a very old way, and it's built with old technology. We could modernize our systems, pay less, and get better outcomes. and be able to talk with people in a way that makes so much more sense and shows them much greater respect. So this is a little bit like the tastes great, less filling. You heard Andrew say in the video, this is not a partisan issue. Conservatives, liberals, everybody wants this. It's cheaper and better. It's like one of the only things in the world that's both cheaper and better. We all want this. But I say we all want this, and not quite everybody wants this, and I'm going to pick on a particular company here. Oracle doesn't want this. Oracle likes it how it was. In fact, when the White House, which continues to support the United States Digital Service and its user-centered, iterative, data-driven approach, it's the same as Code for America's, when they asked for comment from the industry about their plans to continue on this path, Oracle filed public comments. You can see them. Ironically, they're on GitHub. And they said, actually, it's a false narrative that there should be technology talent in government helping us build and buy technology in a smarter way. It's a false narrative that you should use open source in government. They actually state in their comments as a fact that the use of open source has been rapidly declining in the private sector, which is just false. So they're really actively lobbying, not just through this particular comment to the White House, but through a fair amount of lobbying that they do at the local level, at the federal level, at the state level, to make sure that the ways don't change, because they profit from it very, very well. And they're not the only company, of course, that's sort of dragging their heels, but I will say I work with a lot of government technology vendors, and most of them are actually pretty happy about the changes. Because who wants to live that way? Who wants to do these big projects, all of which fail? When Maribel said the last 7 IT projects for the state of California have failed, you know, all of those things get called up in front of the state legislature. They're all negative stories. The people who work on those projects don't like working on them. You want to work on a successful project that you're proud of. So most of the vendor ecosystem is coming along and saying, actually, this is going to be better. Let's just get behind it. But those folks who are saying government should not have technology talent, should not build capacity and competence in digital, yeah, that's an un-American thing to say. That's saying our government should be incompetent. And I think we really have to start standing up to that and saying, sorry, we the people disagree, and we're gonna keep going. And your elected officials need your backing. If you have any technology expertise, or even if you're just sane and can see that that form is not a good form, not that Oracle did that form, but the new way is better, they need you to help them and say, yeah, we're behind you on this. We're going to make these changes. We're going to do it the new way. Okay, so what happens when you do it the new way? I promised to go back to the Maribel Batcher story. We have this child welfare services project, and Maribel had said to me, if you know another way, you better tell me. And I said, I do know another way. And she is no dummy. She said, without missing a beat, Jennifer, I need you to be in Sacramento on Thursday. So I went to Sacramento on Thursday. I took my old boss, the Chief Technology Officer of the United States, Todd Park, who was amazing, who had been one of the key architects of the rescue of healthcare.gov and championed, of course, my work on the United States Digital Service and all of that work. I took Dan Hahn, who was an amazing change agent at Code for America, now with the state of California. We went up there and we told them about the USDS, and we told them about how projects at Code for America and City of Oakland had been done in a user-centered, data-driven and iterative way. And about 30 minutes into it, the Deputy Secretary of Health and Human Services looked at her and said, let's do it, but only if we can do every project this way. And it takes a long time to move every project to the new model. It's not happened in every project now, but it is certainly starting to happen. And the thing that happened after that moment, of course, is that you had a decision at the executive level that then had to go to an enormous number of public servants who had been doing it the old way for a really, really long time. And I know what many people will think is, oh my God, I'm sure that they were in great resistance. And the actual fact is that they were enthusiastic, scared, sure, but really excited about the chance to do something a different way. There were several hundred people who'd been working on this procurement. I looked. The version of the procurement that was about to go out that version was 3 years in development by the time that Maribel and Mike Wilkening said we're going to throw it out and start over. But it had actually been 11 years that they'd been trying to replace this system. But several hundred people had been working on a 1,478-page procurement for 3 years. And in 6 weeks, they threw it all out and did something different with an agile, modular, user-centered, and data-driven approach. And all of these people got together and said, we're going to just hold hands, and we're going to do this, and we're going to be proud of it. And I really would like you to think about how courageous that is and how much you ought to support your public servants who are making these choices. I'm going to go forward a little bit. So I wanted to leave a lot of time for questions, and I guess I left a little less than I thought. But I just want to end on a couple of things. And one, of course, is just to ask you to think about what's at stake when we don't pay attention to how our government works. And I'm not talking about just the politics. I'm talking about the machinery of government. My friend Brian Loeffler has a line, not caring about the machinery of government is a choice. It is a choice, and we've been making the wrong one for a long time. I think our social safety net is absolutely at stake. We've got people who are going after our social safety net right now on a different basis, not necessarily an implementation basis, but in part because they can poke holes in it because of its implementation problems. Our justice system is absolutely at stake, and I think our sense of our country as a just country is very much at stake. I also happen to work on the Defense Innovation Board with our Department of Defense, and I think our national defense is very much at stake. We are behind. We are radically behind because we're still using Windows 98 computers all over the Department of Defense. We don't know how to use artificial intelligence, and our enemies do, and our frenemies do as well. This is not a place for us to be. But really, in the end, all of those things matter a little bit less, though they matter quite a bit, than the core thing, which is I think we're starting to lose faith that our government can work. And when we do that, that's when we really lose, that's when our democracy is really at stake. I mean, I woke up the morning after the election realizing that a lot of the people that we serve on food stamps voted in a way that I didn't understand, and I should have understood it. Because if you go through that process of applying for food stamps, yes, you want to blow up government too. There's a lot at stake here that we really have to pay attention to. Which is why I just really want to remind you that while we have an incredible growing cohort of public servants who are courageously choosing to do the right thing, looking at you guys, we also cannot do this by expecting someone else to fix government. No one is coming. It's up to us. You have to get involved in this. And there's a lot of ways that you can. If you are in technology or design or even project management, whatever it is, and you haven't yet done your tour of duty in government, now would be the time. There are some listed on jobs.codeforamerica.org. There's also Code for America jobs, and they're at codeforamerica.org/jobs. But these are jobs in government. You don't have to work in government. You can get involved through your brigade. You can just get civically active. And if you have some other ideas of how you like to get involved, I put my email address up there and would be glad to hear from you. But with that, I'd just like to thank all the people in the audience who do work in public service. Thank you. And we're going to start with some questions. And I have to put my glasses on to read them. Let's see. If you could choose one area of the public services that you could fix without any limitations, which one would it be and why? If you mean personally, I would fix the safety net. My first job out of college, I worked in child welfare, and I see what happens when we don't have a safety net that works, and I think we need one more than ever. But I think you could ask that question to any human being in this audience, and I don't care what your answer is, but decide what that is for you and go do it. Being in a federal agency whose IT providers are stuck in developing the old ways, how do I change their minds? Oh, that's a good question. And I would invite others from the audience, if they would like to offer their ideas, to please just come on up. But I'll just start with sort of a thing that's become a little bit of a chestnut around the Code for America USDS circles, and that's you can't tell people, you have to show people. You have to just do it. Once someone does a project in the new way, they won't go back, generally. In fact, we heard from our friends at the state of California that the DMV was convinced to do an Agile project and literally came to them afterwards and said, oh my God, we are never going back. But I think a lot of times when we talk about user-centered, iterative, data-driven, and design thinking and all of these things, it is very scary for people. It sounds very fancy-pantsy. It isn't. It's pretty, I mean, it's a real skill. User-centered design is a real skill that people develop over time. But it sounds like something that's yet another thing that is going to be alienating, and we just really need to democratize it, demystify it, and make everybody realize that anybody can do this thing. I know a lot of people in government are very good at procurement. And when you're very good at that, you want that to be the skill that you're paid to do. In fact, the Department of Defense, I'm going to forget the number. No, I think this is it. So the Department of Defense has over 100,000 procurement officers. And if you ask them how many software developers they have, they can't tell you because there's no classification for that job. But it's at least an order of magnitude, probably less. Right? So you have these 100,000 procurement officers who know how to do it the old way, and you really have to make them feel like they can be valuable in the new way, and they absolutely can. I mean, there's just tons of evidence of this. The Defense Digital Service is doing a great job now just staffing every procurement with a software developer so that they can get it right and do it in the new way. But we have about a 1/1000th of the software developers that we need if we're going to staff even just the DoD. Then you get to the rest of federal government, then you get to cities, states, and counties. We have a massive problem. And by the way, I'm a little bit ranting here for a second about a different topic, but it's related. It's not, the way to solve this is not to take 10,000 coders and put them into government, because you're not going to do much coding. It's to take people with digital skills and user-centered design and put them in and help them get these procurements right. But you can't actually take people straight out of college and throw thousands and thousands of coders at the project. You really have to have an infrastructure to do this and a way to plug people in. And a lot of people who are used to doing coding are going to do stuff that is not actually coding, but they're going to serve their country in really powerful ways. It's so weird reading the questions instead of having people ask them. Like, I know this is better, but I like talking to people. Okay, before we move on, does anybody else want to answer that question? How do you change people's minds? Yes, thank you. I'll repeat what you say, or come to the mic. I know I'm breaking, I'm sorry, but I just I hate it when people in the audience I know have better answers than I do. And I really want to hear from you. Thank you.
Yes. Hi, my name is Sky Kelly, everyone, and I'm with a company called Avisar. So you mentioned a lot about the procurement process. And one of the things that we found is really to help educate the procurement contracting officers, contract admin, on how to properly write a procurement that involves their developers, that involves user-centric design, that really just involves a different way of thinking. Because you're right, we can't have all software programmers in the process. It doesn't help. And people are going to do procurement anyway. Yep. Procurement is $1.7 trillion in the US for city, state, and local. So that's what we found has really been effective in working, because if you start there, then it spreads throughout the organization in terms of how software is purchased, how software is thought about, and really how software is implemented.
Thank you. I completely agree. And one of the sort of false narratives about the creation of digital services teams in every level of government is that they are somehow going to take over and do all software development in government, and that's just blatantly crazy. What they're going to do is make government much better at building and buying software, but particularly at buying it. And also help government think about technology not as something that you just buy, but as digital services that you run, that you don't build it once and then just hope it works, but that you have the capacity to change it over time whether it's your technology or your policy. I think those things can change together when you realize what's not working, and you can change it. But it's really just about that capacity, and we will absolutely, of course, still be working with vendors. They're great. They just need a different set of rules. Okay. The next, I'm going to take the top one. I'm supposed to tell you guys. Somebody asks, how are you funded, and how do you convince and make it possible within bureaucracy for government to contract you and to share their data? There's a couple different questions in there. On the second part, like I said, yes, I think inherent in that question is an assumption that government broadly, and what does that really mean? Government is people. The government doesn't want to work in this way. Well, we have in the room people who have very actively pursued working with Code for America and done great projects with us. And I think it doesn't take, you don't need every single human being in a particular city or county or agency to be ready to do the next thing. You need a couple people who are champions and say, yeah, there's some real value in this. I'm looking at our mayor and other folks in the city of Oakland because we did a great project with them, and they were just so gung-ho and such champions of it to the other people in government. So in that regard, I think it's just about finding people who are eager and then making it inclusive, saying this isn't just about a couple people doing something. This is everybody can be involved with this. Let's demystify it for you, and please be a part of doing this, letting people have a chance to try it out. The second part of the question, or the first part of the question, was about how we're funded. We're funded, we get paid by some of our partners in government. When I showed you Get CalFresh, which is the 7-minute application that works on a mobile phone, and all of the back end of working with users, text messaging, helping people through the rest of the process, that's actually now paid for by the state of California. But we didn't respond to a procurement to get it built. We built it with philanthropic dollars because as procurement stands today, it's still largely a process of meeting government needs instead of user needs. So when we get philanthropy, including the philanthropy of lots and lots of people who just send us $20 because they like what we're doing, all the way up to large foundations, we use that money to build something that we think is completely focused on what the user needs. And in that case, the user is a family or an individual who is looking for food assistance. And then when we can show that it's actually solving the problem, not just for the user, but for government has a problem when you have only 55% of people enrolled in a particular program, then we can convince them to help us pay for it. But we are a mix of those, both of those kinds of funding. What are your suggestions for scaling change in government organizations? Man, that is a tough one. Any advice? So I think, again, inherent in that question is the sense that you are going to have something small that you'll want to scale. And I think that's a good place to start. You're not going to, change doesn't happen by rolling everything in at once. You do a pilot project, you invite more and more people on, you make it more and more inclusive, and it has more and more grassroots support. It's not just something that's come down from the top. Very often it's something that's from, champion at the bottom and champion at the top and sort of come together. When I was asked to come to the White House, they said, we want you to come and run a Code for America program at the federal level. They'd actually already started. It was called the Presidential Innovation Fellows Program, which is a wonderful program. But I actually said I don't want to just do the sort of innovation at the edges. I'm really interested in trying to follow what our friends in the UK have done of creating something at the center that isn't optional, and it's not just an innovation expert who sits along with you, but it's people who are going to start doing, this is how we're going to do things. And there is a point at which you have to insist that it's not just happening at the edges, but that you insist that it start to replace the old way. And that is a very tricky math of when it is the right time to do that. And it requires a lot of, as my friend would say, chopping wood and carrying water. There's no silver bullet. You really have to get out there and work with people through their concerns about change. Very often you have to do a lot of debunking of myths, like I think the thing you're doing is illegal. It's not illegal. It's not illegal to do an agile procurement. It's not illegal to talk to users. But many public servants had been told this so long that you have to really show them, no, here's how it works. And it takes a while. It takes a long time. Oh, talk about how Code for America's brigades plug into their governments to realize these better processes from idea to launch. Code for America brigades work with their governments in as many different ways as there are brigades. So it's a little bit hard to generalize. I will speak of one of my favorite brigades, Open Oakland, that meets in City Hall on Tuesday nights. Staff from the city will be there almost every night, or very, very often. One example there would be like they will take the city budget data and visualize it for the citizens. They will work with them on projects. We have told the people who lead and are part of Code for America brigades, and maybe Victoria wants to add here. Is she still back there? There you are. You come on up here. Go to the mic. I want you to answer this question when I'm done. There's a lot of good government groups and sort of watchdog groups out there, and I think there's a real place for them. And there are many cases in which Code for America brigades do serve as hey, this isn't quite right here and there. We've had some very interesting stuff going on with Asheville, North Carolina, where they're looking at their police stop data. But first and foremost, before we're watchdogs, we're there to help. Right? It's not, we have a saying, are we just going to be a crowd of voices and shout at government, or are we actually going to show up and help out? And so that relationship where we can sort of make the people, and whoever it is in government that's open to hearing it, understand that this is a group of people who actually want their government to work better and are there to help them in most cases. That's really the foundation for the relationship. Victoria, you want to add a little?
Yeah, I'll say like at Open Austin, we're definitely sort of like a connector from community and government. We provide a space where people can ask questions and get to know the initiatives that the city is working on, kind of like those healthy relationships where we understand that they're doing their best, and we're just kind of trying to learn and figure out where we can plug in and help. So recently, we had Open Data Day last Saturday, where we educated citizens about the open data initiatives that the City of Austin is doing, but also some other open data work done at nonprofits and businesses here in town too. So we're really just trying to like create these conversations and educate folks, but there's also been projects that we've worked on with city partners in the past too.
Thanks. Team Oakland want to say anything? No? You guys do know that we have a mayor in our audience right now who has just shown amazing leadership in Oakland. My daughter is in the Oakland Public Schools, and I got an email from her principal saying, our mayor, Libby Schaaf, has wanted everybody to know that we might have ice raids and that we want every kid in Oakland to know that they're cared for and loved and that we're going to do the best that we can. And it was because our mayor chose to speak up and warn our community. And I think every kid in Oakland, I mean, this was the whole city, of course, but I'm thinking about these kids because I got this message. I think every parent read that message and thought, these people got our back. They're there for our community, and I just want to thank you. Okay, more crazy bureaucracy questions. How do you create an environment within the government where you're able to attract and retain the smartest creatives needed for this project? I like this question. It's hard to hire great tech talent into government, isn't it? They all want to go to places that pay more and move faster and where there's free lunch. Not so much. In fact, when we were recruiting people to the first round of USDS and the healthcare.gov rescue, all we would do is say, this is going to be the worst, hardest job you have ever had. It's going to suck. You're not going to get paid very much. There's definitely no free food. You're going to work till you're practically collapsing. And you're really going to be frustrated, and you're not going to be mostly doing the things that you thought you were trained to do. You're not going to be doing a lot of coding. And what we got was, do I have a shot at saving the ACA? And we said, we think you do. And they said, sign me up. And routinely, if you can describe the impact that you will have by doing this job, you will get the people. Is also, of course, true that some people, can't move across the country, or they can't take a job that pays lower. In fact, many jobs pay quite well in government, but that's not the point. I'm not saying anybody who doesn't take the job is a horrible person. There's a lot of things that go on in people's lives. But the absolute answer to that question is talk about the impact, because when you realize the impact it will have on people's lives, you will take that. You are very, very likely to take that job. How do you measure the success of our projects? I'm reading the one that's in the biggest type because I don't have my glasses on. How do you measure the success of your projects? That is a great question too, and it's a little bit complicated. And I'll say that for every one of them, it's a little bit different. We have chosen for the food stamps work to measure it by how much we are closing the participation gap in food stamps. You could choose a million different things. You could say how many people are visiting the site, how many people are getting through the site, how many people are actually getting the benefit. You could say it's about how we are doing that, how the state of California will choose to do the future procurement, which is actually very important to us and sort of another way we measure it. But it's really important to us that we don't just stay at how many people land on the site, that we actually hold ourselves accountable to, are we helping people, like I said on ClientComm, the texting thing, are we helping people get through the system, but are we also actually changing the system? Are we creating different conditions that are going to enable this government, this jurisdiction, whatever it is, to do better next time? I could spend 4 hours going over our metrics, because as a grant-funded organization, we have a lot of metrics that we track. And I won't bore you with all that, but I will say it's really important to us to always pull up to that higher and higher level. Oh, we're close. Okay, I have one more. Once you develop, I'm going to go with the first one. Once you develop a solution in one city or state, how successful have you been in implementing the solution in another place? One of the reasons we started working on things like food stamps and probation and clearing people's records is that we're trying to make it more and more replicable. I'm going to imagine for a second that the person asking this question has some of the same thesis that I had when I started Code for America, which was, I'll build it for one city and then every other city will use it. And that's a little harder than it sounds. We were a bit naive about that, or rather maybe very naive about that when we began. There's a fair amount of customization that's required for different cities, and different cities do things in different ways. But it doesn't mean that they don't scale. There is now a very robust and beautiful ecosystem of companies that do technology for government, again, at every level, now increasingly on a sort of a SaaS basis with great human-centered design, that are figuring that out. We really moved to work more and more, again, in social services, in criminal justice, and in workforce training, because it would scale. It doesn't mean it scales that easily, but for instance, we can do everybody, even though every county in California administers food stamps differently, we can all have them go through one interface. So that's been really important to us to be able to do that. Really, though, I care much less about, at Code for America, we're a nonprofit. Our motto is shape the market, don't take the market. We're not trying to have our technology everywhere. We're not trying to have our products everywhere. What we are trying to do is spread a user-centered, iterative, and data-driven approach everywhere. And we think what that looks like is the right products and the right vendors being in the room with the right public servants and doing it differently. Everything we do is just sort of a wedge to be able to have that conversation and change the dynamics. I think I see that another one of our great government vendors is here. Is that you, Dan? Yeah. Ad hoc is another one of the vendors that's come out of this healthcare.rescue, doing things the new way and partnering with, again, really great public servants to make this work. So I think that we're out of time, but I just want to thank you all for being here, and please, take some action coming out of this, whether it's starting a brigade. If there isn't one in your community, there are 65 around the country right now, but we would love there to be 6,000 of them soon. Joining a brigade, just going down to City Hall and meeting people and telling people that you want to help out, thinking about working in government, or just reaching out with whatever idea it is that you have. Thanks a lot for doing whatever it is you're going to do.